They threw poison at you, hoping it would paralyze you. They whispered in shadows, thinking words could cut deeper than action. Haters and snakes live on distraction. Their entire existence feeds on your reaction, on whether you stop and turn around to address their venom. You didn't stop. You marched forward. You refused to let their words anchor your steps. That's what burned them the most. When someone wants you to break, nothing crushes them more than seeing you get stronger with each strike they deliver. Silence became your answer, progress became your shield, and the march itself became your victory. They are still speechless because no weapon works on someone who does not give permission for wounds. There is something powerful about walking straight through betrayal without begging for clarity. They expected confrontation, arguments, explanations, maybe even revenge. What they didn't expect was detachment. You chose to leave their fire behind instead of adding fuel to it. That is what separates the ones who survive from the ones who thrive. Survival means standing still after the storm. Thriving means building through the storm while others choke on smoke. You never begged them to see your worth. You never demanded apologies. That is why your image burns in their mind longer than their lies ever could. Snakes always reveal themselves when they think you are too distracted to notice. They crawl closer when they smell vulnerability, waiting for a slip in awareness. You kept your eyes open. You learned to read behavior instead of believing words. That sharpened awareness protected you more than any armor ever could. You began to understand the psychology of those who betray. They attack because they assume you rely on them. When you reveal that you never needed them, their fangs lose power. You became untouchable not because you avoided betrayal, but because you mastered how to walk through it without bleeding. Haters are addicted to noise. They cannot survive in silence. Your march terrified them because it created a silence they didn't know how to handle. Every step you took forward was a reminder that they had lost control. They wanted you stuck replaying their words, their rejections, their betrayal. Instead, you used all of it as fuel. That's the part they never calculated, that hate is powerless in the hands of someone who converts it into momentum. You didn't need to erase what they did. You only needed to outgrow it. And when you did, their voices shrank to whispers that could no longer reach you. Psychology says that envy hides itself behind criticism. What they said about you was rarely about you. It was a confession of their own fears, their own inadequacies. They projected their limits onto you because seeing you rise forced them to face themselves. You didn't just walk past them. You exposed them to themselves. And the hardest thing for anyone to face is the mirror of their own smallness. That is why they remain speechless. They cannot craft words sharp enough to defend against the reality that you proved them wrong without lifting a hand against them. Every march forward came at a cost. You lost people you thought were permanent. You carried scars from betrayals you never deserved. Yet every loss became a lesson. You learned that people who try to break you are simply revealing that they fear your strength. Their hate was never about your weakness. It was about their inability to control you. That is why you refused to stop walking. Your scars became reminders that you can bleed and still move, that you can be betrayed and still believe, that you can be outnumbered and still arrive. Snakes will always circle those who shine because deception is threatened by truth. They work together to twist your story, hoping to bury your light under their shadows. Yet, every lie they spread eventually collapsed under the weight of your progress. Reality has a way of catching up. You didn't need to chase validation. You didn't need to correct their narrative. You let time do the talking, and time always speaks louder than whispers. They are left speechless because your growth dismantled every accusation they built. What they failed to understand is that the march itself became your transformation. The more venom they threw, the stronger your immunity became. The more noise they created, the calmer your focus grew. They thought they were pulling you down, but they were sharpening your resilience. There is nothing more dangerous than someone who knows how to use pain as training. You didn't just endure them, you weaponized the experience. And that weapon turned you into someone they cannot touch anymore. Now, when they see you, they remember the stories they spread. They remember the traps they set. Yet they also see that none of it mattered. You kept walking, and you arrived. You became undeniable without their permission, without their applause. That is the moment that leaves them silent. They cannot reconcile the image of who they wanted you to be with the reality of who you became. That contradiction silences them more than any argument ever could. The truth is simple. Haters and snakes are loud at the start but quiet at the end. You walk through them, not around them, not avoiding them, but straight through. And you did it without begging, without proving, without breaking stride. That is why they cannot speak. Because deep down, they know one fact remains. Your march didn't just leave them behind. It buried them in their own bitterness, while you built a life that can no longer hear them. Betrayal feels like a blade pressed against your back, unexpected and cold. They believe that one strike can shatter you, that the wound they leave will slow your steps. What they don't understand is that betrayal doesn't end you. It trims the weak ties. It cuts away the ones who were never meant to stand beside you in the first place. They see it as destruction, but you know better. It is refinement. It is the world removing the weight you didn't realize you were carrying. Every betrayal becomes a cleansing, stripping you of dead weight, leaving only what is strong enough to endure. You don't stumble when ties are cut. You walk lighter, sharper, and harder to reach. That is why betrayal is not the curse they hoped it would be. It is the unintentional gift that forces you to grow leaner, clearer, and impossible to deceive the same way again. They mistake betrayal for power. They think leaving you wounded means leaving you broken. But you don't break where they strike. You harden. You absorb the shock and learn to walk with it. That's the danger of betraying someone like you. You don't collapse, you evolve. The next time someone reaches for that same weakness, they find only steel. They cut you once, but they built your armor without realizing it. And while they gloat over what they think is victory, you are sharpening yourself for the path ahead. Betrayal doesn't mark your ending. It sets the stage for the version of you that no longer entertains weak ties or hollow promises. In relationships, betrayal exposes the illusions you once believed in. They told you loyalty, but their actions whispered convenience. They said forever, but they meant as long as it was easy. When the mask drops, the betrayal stings, but the truth it carries is cleaner than the lie you would have lived with. It clears the air. It shows you who cannot go forward with you. They thought they destroyed your belief in love, but they only destroyed their own seed in your story. You move forward, no longer weighed down by their half-love. That is how betrayal trims. It teaches you what deserves to stay and what must go. In self-growth, betrayal is the fire that burns away illusions about people's intentions. You trusted their applause only to realize it was empty. You trusted their encouragement only to learn it was envy dressed as support. That moment hurts, but it also frees you. Once you see the truth, you no longer rely on them for energy. You learn to fuel yourself. Betrayal teaches you that dependence is weakness and self-sufficiency is power. They took themselves out of your story, and in doing so, they freed you to build one without their shadows. What they thought was sabotage was pruning. Haters and snakes believe betrayal stalls your journey, but betrayal speeds it up. Every false ally slows progress. Every weak tie distracts you. When they betray you, they take themselves off your path, and suddenly the road is clearer. You walk straighter, faster, lighter. You no longer spend your time deciphering intentions or questioning their loyalty. Betrayal cuts through the fog. They expected it to stop you. Instead, it simplified everything. The path ahead is sharper because the noise behind you is gone. There is a psychological truth. Betrayal doesn't create weakness, it reveals it. The betrayer shows their fear, their envy, their inability to walk beside strength without trying to diminish it. Their act exposes more about them than it does about you. You don't lose by being betrayed. You lose only if you let the wound become your identity. But you didn't. You turned it into a scar, and scars remind you where to never be cut again. They left you sharper because now you know how to spot the pattern, how to detect the signs, how to sense the shift in energy before the knife arrives. You don't chase the ones who betray you. You don't beg them to stay. That is what makes you unshakable. Betrayal is their declaration that they cannot keep up with the weight of your journey. They quit on you, not the other way around. You keep moving, and every step forward without them proves what they never wanted to admit. You didn't need them. They needed you. And once they're gone, they see how quickly you rebuilt without their presence. That realization silences them. Betrayal sharpens your boundaries. It forces you to stop giving discounts on your loyalty. It makes you raise the price of your presence. They thought betraying you would make you easier to manipulate. Instead, it made you harder to reach. You no longer welcome everyone into your circle. You no longer waste energy explaining your value. The ones who remain know they must bring truth, not illusion, strength, not convenience. Betrayal becomes the filter that ensures only the real ones remain. The ones who betrayed you wait for you to collapse. They wait for you to crumble under loneliness or bitterness. But you don't collapse. You rewire. You rebuild. You rise sharper, carrying less baggage, clearer about your direction. They expect tears, but they see growth. They expect weakness, but they face resilience. And that silence, that inability to process how you turned their knife into your tool, leaves them powerless. They gave you betrayal. You turned it into momentum. So betrayal does not end you. It trims, it filters. It hurts, yes, but it hardens you. It exposes the weak ties and leaves only strength in your circle and within yourself. Every time someone tries to end you through betrayal, they only speed up your evolution. And that is why you march forward sharper, stronger, untouchable, while they remain stuck, speechless and powerless against the version of you they unknowingly helped create. They shouted the loudest when they thought you were fragile. Their voices grew strong when they imagined your walls were thin, your foundation weak. Critics survive on the fantasy of your downfall. They feed on it because they hope that if you fall, they will never have to face their own shortcomings. They bet on your collapse to validate their whispers. Yet when you stood steady, when you refused to break, their voices lost power. Nothing kills a critic faster than silence on your end, paired with strength in your steps. They thought they were narrators of your failure. Instead, they became background noise in your endurance. And the more you refused to collapse, the quieter they became until their voices turned into nothing more than a faint echo of wasted effort. Critics always expect a reaction. They want you to argue back, to prove them wrong in words. They wait for signs of anger, insecurity, or desperation. That is how they confirm their illusion of influence. But when you give them nothing, no collapse, no reaction, they suffocate in their own noise. They expected you to spiral downward from their judgment, but you rose instead. Every action you took that defied their predictions stripped away their confidence. They no longer had a stage to stand on because their entire act was built on the expectation of your weakness. They were loud until the mirror of your survival forced them into silence. In relationships, the loudest critics often hide their envy behind their concern. They frame their words as guidance while secretly hoping you stumble. They point out flaws, highlight failures, and amplify mistakes because they want to feel taller standing on your struggles. But you didn't fall the way they hoped. You kept going, refining yourself, and growing stronger in the same areas they tried to shame you. That resilience burned them more than confrontation ever could. They couldn't explain how the version of you they ridiculed became the version of you they could never reach. Their silence now is the sound of defeat. In self-growth, criticism is the test of your conviction. If you believe in yourself only when praised, you will bend under judgment. But you chose a different path. You built resilience by walking through doubt, by moving forward even when every voice around you screamed you would fail. That is why when the critics tried to crush you, you didn't collapse, you expanded. Their voices grew weaker each time you refused to quit. Psychology teaches that people project what they fear in themselves. Their loudness was never about you. It was their confession. When you proved them wrong through action, they had nothing left to project. Silence became their surrender. The psychology of a critic is simple. They crave confirmation that their doubts are justified. They want to believe the world is too hard, success is impossible, and growth is an illusion. So when they see you breaking those rules, they attack. It is not because they see you as weak, but because they see you as proof they could have done more. By not collapsing, you hold up a mirror to everything they refuse to face. And the human instinct when confronted with uncomfortable truth is silence. That is why they fall quiet. Not because they changed their opinion, but because you destroyed their ability to justify it. They thrive in groups, louder when they are surrounded by others. But even a mob grows silent when the target refuses to collapse. Your survival was a statement they could not argue against. The more they spoke, the more foolish they looked, because your endurance turned their criticism into comedy. They wanted to narrate your failure, but instead they exposed their envy. That shift killed their voices. Nothing silences critics faster than becoming living proof of the strength they doubted. When you didn't collapse, you created a silence heavier than any comeback. That silence was filled with your progress, your endurance, your victories. They couldn't compete with results. Words may echo, but results cast shadows they cannot escape. Every achievement you made without addressing them was a blade to their pride. They expected you to fight them in the arena of words. Instead, you fought them in the arena of reality, and reality crushed their noise until nothing remained but silence. The loudest critics always gamble on timing. They speak when they think you are weakest. They believe their words will strike hardest in your lowest moments. But that gamble fails when you rise from those very moments. You stole the oxygen from their lungs by showing that even at your lowest, you would not collapse. That forced them into silence because their strategy had no answer for resilience. They only know how to attack the weak. They don't know how to confront the strong. What they never calculated was the after effect of their criticism. They thought they were cutting you down, but they were sharpening you. Each word became fuel, each insult became resistance training, each doubt became fire under your feet. And when you emerged sharper, calmer, and stronger, their voices couldn't carry anymore. They fell silent not by choice, but by defeat. Because no critic can speak with authority when the target refuses to collapse and instead becomes undeniable. Snakes move in circles. They recycle the same schemes, whisper the same lies, repeat the same betrayals. Their patterns are predictable once you learn to see them. They assume repetition makes them clever, that a well-practiced trick will work forever. But you stop being hypnotized by patterns. You freed your mind from their rhythm. A free mind doesn't move in circles. It moves in lines, diagonals, unexpected turns. They expect you to play by the same rules, to react the same way you did before. But you don't repeat yourself. You change, adapt, evolve. That is why they choke on their own venom. They planned for who you used to be. They never planned for who you became. Their strength has always been deception. Snakes rely on predictability. They count on you falling for appearances, for words, for carefully staged illusions. But you dismantled those illusions piece by piece. You started reading intention instead of listening to speech. You studied action instead of believing smiles. Once you did that, their power dissolved, because a snake's bite only works if you don't see it coming. And you began seeing it every time. That sight alone made you untouchable. They could plot for months, but you would still step around their trap with ease. A free mind doesn't get caged twice. Snakes crave control. They want to pull your strings with envy, guilt, and fear. Their whole strategy is to predict your reaction and use it against you. They need you to explode so they can call you unstable. They need you to chase so they can call you desperate. They need you to bow so they can call you weak. But you cut the strings. You chose silence when they wanted chaos. You chose progress when they wanted distraction. That broke their rhythm completely. Because a snake cannot dance if the music doesn't play, and you stopped being their instrument. In relationships, snakes use cycles. They leave and return, betray and apologize, hurt and then beg. They rely on the hope that your memory is short, that your forgiveness is infinite. A free mind remembers. You didn't fall for repeated patterns. You didn't let them crawl back into your life disguised as change. They hated that. They hated that your growth made their games obsolete. Snakes don't know how to deal with a mind that cannot be fooled twice. And when they realize their patterns don't work on you anymore, they slither away in silence, exposed and powerless. In self-growth, snakes appear as doubts dressed as logic. They whisper the same lies again and again: you're not enough, you'll never make it, you should quit now. They count on your mind looping back into old fears. But you freed yourself from the loop. You built new pathways, trained your mind to reject the whispers, to focus on possibility instead of limitation. Snakes can't adapt to that because their power comes from repetition. A free mind thrives in reinvention. They wanted you stuck in yesterday's pattern. You became tomorrow's exception. Psychology explains that manipulators depend on routines. They test reactions, record them, then use them again. If you react the same way, they own you. If you change, they lose their grip. You became unpredictable. One day quiet, the next day untouchable, the next day completely absent from their game. That unpredictability made them afraid. Because snakes aren't strong, they are strategic. Take away their ability to predict, and they are just fragile creatures with sharp teeth. You didn't just beat them. You rewrote the map they depend on. The more you moved freely, the more restless they became. They couldn't understand how someone who had been hurt didn't return to bitterness. They couldn't process how betrayal didn't make you desperate for revenge. That confusion shattered their confidence. They thrive when you are simple to read. But you became a book written in a language they never learned. And nothing frustrates a snake more than a prey they can no longer decode. Your freedom turned you from prey into something else entirely. Untouchable, unreadable, unbreakable. Snakes cling to patterns because patterns feel safe. But that safety becomes their prison. You didn't let fear trap you. You allowed pain to teach you. You allowed betrayal to sharpen you. You turned every setback into a reinvention. That's why your movement became impossible to track. They couldn't tell where you'd be next, how you'd respond, or what you'd build. And that unpredictability is scarier than any confrontation. Because how do you plot against someone who doesn't move on lines you recognize? Your freedom terrified them because it meant you no longer needed their approval, their company, or their validation. Snakes lose all leverage when they realize they don't matter anymore. That's why their patterns grew louder, their lies bolder, their schemes desperate. But desperation is sloppy. They revealed themselves in ways they never meant to. And you saw it all clearly. You didn't need to strike back. You only needed to keep moving freely. Their venom never touched you because it couldn't reach someone who no longer walks their path. They thought their plotting would erase you. They believed whispered schemes and hidden traps could turn you into a casualty. What they never understood is that plotting against you does not weaken you. It strengthens you. Every move they made in secret became a lesson you carried openly. Every betrayal, every setup, every attempt to undermine you became evidence that you could endure more than they expected. You didn't need to tell your story. They told it for you by the very effort they put into trying to break you. Their plotting became the stage, and your resilience became the performance they could not silence. Those who plot do so because they fear what you already are. If you were insignificant, they wouldn't waste energy. Their very decision to conspire proves your impact. They could have ignored you. Instead, they made you the center of their plans. And by making you the target, they confirmed your importance. That's the irony. They become proof of your strength simply by choosing you as the one to take down. Every failed attempt they launch becomes a public reminder that you cannot be removed so easily. They tried to erase your name, yet in their plotting, they engraved it deeper. When they fail, and they always fail, the evidence of your resilience is undeniable. People see that you stood through storms designed to bury you. They see that you kept moving when the weight was meant to crush you. Resilience isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows in the aftermath, in the fact that you're still standing when they swore you wouldn't be. Their plotting turns into your testimony. Their whispers become your validation. They tried to write your downfall, but in doing so, they authored your legend. In relationships, those who plot against you show their envy in the form of betrayal. They try to twist perception, to poison trust, to turn allies into enemies. They think destroying your connections will isolate you. Yet betrayal clears space for truth. It trims the weak, leaving only the loyal. And when you continue to stand without them, the betrayal doesn't weaken you. It proves your resilience. People see you endure heartbreak without losing your spirit. They see you walk away from betrayal without losing yourself. The very ones who plotted against you become the backdrop to your transformation. In self-growth, plotting looks like doubt. They want to feed you fear, to make you abandon your path. They say you won't make it, that you're reaching too high, that you don't have what it takes. They plot with words meant to sink into your skin like poison. But when you keep moving forward, when you prove them wrong with action instead of debate, their doubts only highlight your resilience.